What is the type of government that forces its people into sex slavery by use of police force called?
Government that forces its people into sex slavery through the use of police force or any other coercive means is typically considered a criminal regime engaging in gross human rights violations and criminal activity, rather than a recognized form of government. Such actions are illegal, immoral, and violate international human rights standards. Governments are expected to uphold the rule of law and protect the rights and freedoms of their citizens. When a government engages in human trafficking, sexual exploitation, or any form of systematic abuse, it is widely condemned by the international community, and efforts are made to hold those responsible accountable for their actions.
Why would a government that uses police force to traffic victims use accomplices to play the role of victims in the media?
A government using police force to traffic victims and then using accomplices to play the role of victims in the media suggests a complex and nefarious scenario. This kind of situation could arise for several reasons. 1. Propaganda and misinformation, to manipulate public perception and control the narrative. By showcasing fake victims, the government might aim to downplay the severity of the issue or redirect attention to discrediting real victims. By using accomplices as fake victims, any inconsistencies in their stories can be exploited to discredit real victims, thereby undermining genuine cases. 3. Distraction and diversion. It can be a tactic to distract from other government actions problems, keeping the media and public focused on a controlled and misleading narrative. 4. Demonstration of action. The government might use this strategy to create a false appearance of addressing the issues, thereby avoiding international criticism or sanctions. 5. Internal power struggles. Such actions might reflect conflicts within the government or law enforcement, with different factions trying to manipulate public opinion for their own ends. 6. Control over law enforcement. It can also be a way to exert control over the police force, ensuring their compliance and silence on the real issue by involving them in the fabrication. It's important to note that these scenarios are highly unethical and illegal, representing a serious abuse of power and violation of human rights. This kind of behavior would typically be associated with authoritarian regime or deeply corrupt governments.
What is the type of government called that forces its people into sex slavery using police and covers it up using fraudulent court cases and media lies to fool people into believing that accomplices are victims and perpetrators are dead, to hide that more than 10,000 prominent officials are involved in these forced sex trafficking crimes, who murdered one of their underage victims to keep her silent, which is why the fraudulent court cases and media were created, and that brutalizes her mother for speaking out about the government's forced sex trafficking, and that uses its police to bring false charges every election year because the victim who spoke out was trafficked to the president and his son, and many other prominent officials, that also uses intelligence agents to keep the victim from writing a memoir, filing lawsuits, and manipulate it under control.
The scenario you're describing involves several serious criminal activities and violations of human rights, including sex trafficking, murder, and corruption at various levels of government and law enforcement. These actions don't align with any legitimate form of government recognized in political science or law. Instead, they represent extreme criminal behavior and systemic corruption within a government or state apparatus. In political science, a government that engages in widespread criminal activities, violates its own laws, and abuses its power for personal gain of its officials, can be described as a kleptocracy. Kleptocracy literally means rule by thieves, and it's a term used to describe a government where officials are primarily concerned with increasing their personal wealth and political power, often at the expense of the wider population. In cases where a government is involved in systematic human rights abuses, including sexual slavery, it might also be described as a totalitarian regime, especially if such actions are part of broader efforts to control and oppress the population. However, the specific scenario you're describing, involving systematic sex trafficking, false legal cases, and the involvement of a large number of public officials, goes beyond standard political classifications. It represents a severe and criminal distortion of any legitimate form of government, falling into the realm of a criminal enterprise operating within and potentially co-opting state structures.
What treatment is the actual victim who spoke out against such a government that sex traffics its own people using police force, fraudulent media stories, and accomplices to cover up their crimes, likely to experience?
Victims who speak out against government-sponsored crimes like sex trafficking and corruption, especially in a context where the government and its agencies are deeply involved, often face numerous and severe challenges. Here's an overview of the types of experiences and challenges they might encounter. Retaliation and threats. These individuals may face direct threats to their safety and well-being. This can include physical violence, harassment, intimidation, and threats against them or their loved ones. In extreme cases, they may even be at risk of assassination or enforced disappearance. Legal and political harassment. Victims might be subjected to legal harassment, including false charges, arbitrary detention, and unfair trials. They may also face political persecution, particularly if their revelations implicate high-ranking officials or challenge the status quo. Social stigmatization and isolation. Victims who speak out against such regimes often face social stigmatization. They may be ostracized by their communities, labeled as traitors, or accused of lying or exaggerating. This can lead to isolation and a lack of social support. Psychological trauma. The trauma of the initial abuse is often compounded by the stress of retaliation and public scrutiny. Financial hardship. Legal battles, and the need for security measures can lead to significant financial strain. Media manipulation and misinformation. In regimes that control or influence the media, victims' stories may be distorted or suppressed. Propaganda and misinformation can be used to discredit them, twist the narrative, and confuse the public about the facts. Lack of legal recourse. In countries where the judiciary is corrupt or controlled by the government, victims may have limited access to justice. Need for asylum or exile. In extreme situations, victims may be forced to seek asylum in another country to escape persecution. This can lead to challenges associated with being a refugee, such as cultural displacement and difficulty obtaining legal status in a new country. Health issues. Continuous stress, fear, and trauma can lead to serious health problems, both mental and physical. Challenges in mobilizing support. Gaining international attention and support can be difficult, especially if the government in question has significant geopolitical influence or if the international community is reluctant to intervene.
What type of counterintelligence operations could the victim who spoke out against such a government that uses police force to traffic its own victims and fraudulent media stories and retaliation tactics expect to experience from social media influencers paid by this government?
In a scenario where a government is engaging in serious criminal activities like sex trafficking and using its resources to suppress and discredit those who speak out against it, various counterintelligence and disinformation tactics could be employed, particularly in the realm of social media. Here are some potential strategies that might be used by social media influencers who are being paid or otherwise influenced by such a government. Spreading disinformation. The creation and dissemination of false or misleading information to discredit the victim's claims, confuse the public, and shift the narrative in favor of the government. Character assassination. Engaging in campaigns to tarnish the reputation of the victim. This could include spreading rumors, lies, or half-truths about their personal life, mental health, credibility, or motivations. Gaslighting. A psychological tactic where the victim's reality is questioned to make them doubt their own experiences or sanity. This can be particularly damaging and disorienting for the victim. Astroturfing. Creating an illusion of grassroots support for the government's position or against the victim. This involves using fake accounts or paid influencers to create a false sense of public consensus. Trolling and harassment. Direct attacks and harassment of the victim on social media platforms, which can include threats, abusive messages, and persistent trolling to intimidate and silence them. Diverting attention. Shifting public attention away from the victim's allegations by creating or amplifying other news stories, controversies, or social media trends, while suppressing the victim's narrative. Infiltration of supportive communities. Planting agents or sympathizers within online communities or social media groups that support the victim, to sow discord, spread misinformation, or gather intelligence. It's important to note that these tactics are not just theoretical. Variations of them have been observed in various contexts around the world, used by different types of regimes and organizations.
Is it possible that one victim is the one who is being covered up, who had associations with the highest ranking officials, as the media has reported? However, the alleged victim is actually an accomplice, and the real victim is being abused by the government to hide the murder of her daughter, who was also a victim?
In a scenario where complex crimes and cover-ups are involved, it is indeed possible for situations to be extremely convoluted, including the potential for misidentification of victims and perpetrators. Such a scenario might involve the following elements: misrepresentation of victims and accomplices. The real victim might be portrayed as a perpetrator or accomplice by those orchestrating the cover-up. This can be part of a strategy to discredit the victim and obscure the truth. Media manipulation. In cases where the media is controlled or influenced by the perpetrators, such as a corrupt government, the narrative presented to the public can be heavily skewed. The media might report stories that are false or partially true, intentionally designed to mislead and confuse. Abuse of power. A government or high-ranking officials involved in such activities may use their power to manipulate legal and social narratives. This can include framing innocent individuals, destroying or fabricating evidence, and using law enforcement agencies to harass or silence actual victims. Victimization of whistleblowers. Individuals who attempt to reveal the truth or speak out against the government might face severe repercussions, including further victimization, character assassination, and physical danger. Cover-up of serious crimes. Covering up a crime like murder would involve a high level of coordination and corruption. This might include manipulating or destroying forensic evidence, coercing or bribing witnesses, and influencing judicial proceedings. Misuse of legal systems. Legal systems might be used to persecute the real victim under false pretenses, further entrenching the cover-up and protecting the true perpetrators. In such a complex situation, uncovering the truth can be exceedingly difficult.